I had never played cards because when we were single, we always went dancing. We never played cards. I started in 1990, and so I learned how to play. You know, I did all right. I wasn't a winner, but I did all right. I'd go every Monday morning. Just a small crowd. I was only about, I think, 15 of the most we get. I remember years ago, it used to be 20, 25. My daughter Barbara brings me up Monday mornings, and she always says to me, well, how are you getting home? And I said, well, I think I'm going to hitchhike today. And she says, oh, don't be so smart, and laughed. Annie Roberts used to come. We always had a tale to tell us. Very interesting. One story is, when I retired and couldn't drive anymore, I couldn't get to cribbage. And so I knew all the people at cribbage. So this guy, Roger Lapierre, and he said to me, "How are you going to come to cribbage?" I said, "I haven't already get there." They said, "Well, if you want to go, I'll pick you up on Monday morning." I said, "Honest to God, won't you?" My wife object. "Why should she?" She said. It was her idea, and I thought, wasn't that nice? But he'd pick me up every Monday morning, 9 o'clock, and bring me home. We're from all different areas. I was the furthest one away. I came from Waltham, and they always said, "Well, what are you doing up here?" And I'd say, "Well, you go where your husband goes." So here I am. I lived in Spencer for, I think, was it 81? Would it be 81 years? Because my husband came from Spencer. Waltham was a big city. You had the Waltham Watch at the time. And yeah, Waltham Manufacturing and all that stuff. Sometimes, like when we were going to school, we lived one block from the regular school and one block from where I go to school. So we always went to the Catholic school. Went 12 years to the Catholic school. And the guys were always playing tricks on the nuns, you know. There's a place at Nambiga Park where they had a park up there. And, you know, when you had a date, you'd go park it up there. And there was one guy who was full of fun, and he had his own car. And he came and he says to me, "You know what I got today?" I said, "What?" He says, "I got one of them damn ducks." And I said, "What do you mean you got one of them damn ducks?" He said, "I caught one." He said, "I got it in the trunk of my car." I said, "Well, if Sister Thethel knows that, she'll want you to bring him in." She says, "Well, sort of give her a little hint. You know, she's always ready for something new to teach us. And she can teach us about the ducks." So I said to her, "Well, I'll try." So I said, "Well, one of them got a duck." "Yeah, where is it?" I said, "The trunk of his car." "Well, go tell them to bring it in. We'll talk about the ducks and how they're born and all that." And so I said, "Well, what about Sister Superior?" She said, "You don't have to worry about her. I got her under my thumb." Well, it was a wonderful childhood I had. Very good. We could go any place, any time. Everybody knew who you were. If you went any place, you like to go out of the neighborhood because the neighbors knew too much about you. They'd say, "Well, so-and-so's son, he's kind of fast, you know. He likes to go to the nightclubs and have drinks. Do you girls know him?" I said, "We know of him, but we don't know him." And our lives were old, you know, like to say, "Why ask such a question like that?" I said to him, "We'll have to start looking for an apartment." He said, "For what?" "Well," I said, "Well, aren't we going to live down here?" And he said, "Oh, no," he says, "I'm going back to Spencer. That's where we're going to live." He says, "There's no hunting and fishing down here, and that's what I do most of the time." I said, "Oh." So I told my mother, and I said, "Well, when he says where you're going, that's where you're going." So that's where I went. But it was a wonderful family, honestly. They treated you so well. In fact, the thing that impressed me most was we got married, but we didn't figure on, we found an apartment. But the funny part of it was, my husband was a Spencerite first and a soldier after. And so he was affiliated with a lot of different nationalities when he was in the service. But when he came to Spencer, he was a Spencerite. So there was a certain way where you lived in Spencer. All the French lived down in Frenchtown, which is, they used to have a railroad, and the railroad goes right through town. And what about the people of different nationalities like me? I'm Irish descent. Well, he said, all the Irish and the Catholics live down West Main Street. I said, oh, is that where we're going to live? Oh, no. And I said, well, where are we going to live? He says, over in Frenchtown. Well, where's that? He said, where the railroad tracks are. I said, oh. So he found a place, and I thought, he told me about it. What he told me, he said, there was no bathroom. There was a lavatory and a sink, but there wasn't any bathtub. So I said to him, well, how do you take a shower or a bath? Because we had both. We had a tub and we had a shower, because my father was a plumber. So he put that in, you know. Well, he says, most of them go for a swim, and they go for swimming down at the Cranberry. And I said, well, what's Cranberry got to do with taking a bath? Well, most of the people that don't have a bathroom go down there and take a bath. I said, oh my God. And he said, well, it's not that bad. I said, well, we'll have to think about another apartment. And he started to say something. But when anything bothered me and I didn't like it, I just had to fill up with tears. And that seemed to help a lot. So my mother said to me, well, he'll look for another apartment for you. So I said, well, what? He said, I suppose you told your mother all about it. I said, well, naturally. And he said, what'd she say? She said that she would probably look for another apartment. I said, oh, your mother is so smart. I said, like her daughter? And I'd laugh. I thought, well, that was hilarious. The biggest joke. My husband, a very smart man. His mother had passed away when he was about 2 or 3, and his father remarried. When we got married, we hadn't thought about buying furniture or all that. And I said to my mother, we had the apartment. She said, what are you going to do about furniture? And I said, well, Hector Lamro, he was related, said that we could, he owned the store, a furniture store, and a couple other stores in Spencer. And he said that we could pick out our furniture there, and we wouldn't have to pay anything until, we could make a weekly payment or a monthly payment. And she said, you don't have to put any money down. He said, no, Mama. He said we could come in and choose what we wanted, and they would deliver it, and he would make out a form for me for us to fill, and we'd have to, pay each month, each week, or whichever way we wanted. And I said, isn't that fantastic? They should have more stores like that. And my mother said, not for kids like you. I said, you'd be buying everything you didn't need. And we'd laugh. We thought that was the biggest joke. I worked for Dr. Larrow. So he was looking for somebody to come in and take dictation. So he hired me, which was good, as long as I didn't have anything to do with blood, because if they saw the sight of blood, I'd pass out. He never told the other doctors. So one of the doctors said to me, well, Marge, he says, we got a little news. He said, we're going to have you help with us with the kids. I said, well, what about the kids? Well, he said, they all have to be vaccinated. So I said, well, what's that mean? He says, well, they're going to have an injection. And I said, an injection for what? He said, well, to go to school. I said, you mean it's going to show blood? He said, yeah. I said, oh, well, I can't do any of that. He said, why? Because I says, I fainted blood. And I said, and that wouldn't do for me, for the kids to see me pass it out. He said, oh, well, we'll take care of that. Oh, and I always kept, and what's my candy? My special candy that I liked was a Hershey Kisses. And I always keep a bag of those in one of my drawers of my desk. And I said, well, you get any kisses? And I said, what kind do you want? He said, oh, you get different kinds. I said, yeah, I get different kinds. He said, what kind do you like? And I said, I like chocolate. Oh, he says, and he started to laugh, and he said, what do you mean by what kind do I like? He says, I'm a married man. And I said, yeah, I know, but I'm not worried about that because I know your wife real good. She'll understand what I mean. And we started to laugh because he thought that was a joke. When I retired from work, I worked with Dr. Sam and Dr. Babuda, and they had hired somebody to help me with the office work. Well, I didn't have to worry about that because she did it all. And I was only 64 and I thought I'd retire, but I wouldn't have any retirement because you have to be 65. So Dr. Sama says to me, now that you've got help, how do you feel? I said, good. But I said, I'd like to discuss something with you. I'd like to retire. He said, why? Aren't we treating you okay? I said, you treat us like I was a queen. But I said, this queen's getting tired. And I said, I'd like to retire. He said, well, that's up to you. I said, no, it's up to you. I said, what do you mean? I said, I can't afford to retire. I have to wait till I'm 65 before they get on Medicare. Oh, well, let me talk that over with Jack, the other doctor. And so a couple of weeks later, he says, well, I've got a solution, and I think you'll like it. I said, Jack and I talked it over, and we decided we would pay your retirement for a whole year until you get to be 65. I said, oh, my God, oh, wow, oh, boy, I run over and I gave him a big hug and a big squeeze. I said, where's Jack? I want to give him a hug and a squeeze. And I said, are you sure? That's going to cost you a lot of money, you know. I don't come cheap. And he started to laugh. He says, no, he says, you deserve it. You really worked hard. When we first started out, you did everything. I did the cleaning. I did everything. Yeah. So people are kind. People are kind and generous. If they see you need help, then right away they help you. They don't wait to be asked. They just help you. Like when I retired, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I belonged to, I was St. Mary's Church, and they had taken care of the needy, and they were helpers. Kathy Sullivan and Kathy LaPearl. Was it LaPearl? Yeah. Well, anyway, those are the two big ones that helped me. And we were working, I think there was only 5 of us who were working from St. Mary's. And I decided to go up there and I asked them if they needed any help. They said, boy, we sure do. So I started helping there. Then we moved down to Our Lady of the Rosary. So I think it was almost 25 years or 30 years that I worked with that. My kids all live in this area. Yeah, I'm very fortunate. The one that lives the furthest is Beverly. She lives in Overlook. Then I have a daughter, Barbara, that lives about 5 miles from here. That's Barbara. Andrea lives Chow. Then I have my son that lives 5 miles from here. So I'm very fortunate that I live within the district. Yeah, they're very, very good. Well, I'm 103,
Yeah.
and I don't take any medication. My daughter, well, Linda makes sure that I look this good, because if it wasn't for her, I don't know what I would look like. And Linda takes me to hairdressers. Linda takes me to have my toenails done. And Linda takes me if I want to go eat someplace, Linda takes me. So I'm very blessed that I have her, thank God. I have 5 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. I'm very proud of them, they're all so good.
And you've been happy in Spencer?
Very happy, very happy. It's a wonderful place to live.